What's your trauma plan? What are you going to do with the trauma you've experienced? And if you've had this job for any amount of time, don't try and tell me that you haven't had or experienced some trauma. Maybe you've dealt with it well so far, and maybe you will for your whole career. But maybe you won't, and you need a plan. Our guest today, a former law enforcement officer, military staff sergeant. He thought he had a plan. And then he found himself with a gun in his hand. And then he came up with a new plan. Stay with us.
You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
So 133. I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
42, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy, running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
I believe we have shot fired. Give me back up now.
Because no one else is coming.
We're going to have an officer shot. 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down.
This is the Squad Room.
Hello, partners. Welcome back to another episode of The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Slaw. I'm an active duty sergeant for a sheriff's department in Southern California. And here on this show, we talk about a wide variety of topics around the life of being a first responder. And I thank you for being with us. If you've been on the show or listening to the show for a little while, you know that, like I said, we cover a wide variety of things. But recently, you've noticed probably that we are emphasizing a lot of mental health, PTSD, trauma, that sort of stuff. And that's because we just finished out a year, again, where law enforcement officer suicides far surpassed line of duty deaths. And so we need to be able to address this trauma and talk about it and deal with it. And our guest today, a man, Dan Jarvis, a man who is a former law enforcement officer who did 2 stints in the Army and suffered some very serious injuries while doing his service and came close. And I'm going to let him talk about himself and his story in this. But the end result was that he has now taken his experience, the negative experiences of his life, he's transformed them into something motivational and actionable for other people so that they can have a path forward so they don't have to go through what he did. His foundation and organization is called 22-0. The idea being that we all know this common number that there are 22 veterans who commit suicide every day, and his goal in life, and it's not a small one, is to get that number to 0. And if there's anybody who's going to do it, I think Dan is one of the guys who could do it. So we'll let Dan tell his story, but listen all the way through. Listen to him talk about the similarities between military and law enforcement and how he talks is the same way I talk about our badges, our beliefs, actions, discipline, goals, emotions, and our service, and how all of those things must be in alignment. We must pay attention to them, and we must develop them. And Dan has that same idea, and he puts that out through 22-0. All right, before we get to the interview, I want to emphasize a few things. One is, if you're not on the Facebook group, you should be really on the Facebook group. You can search out the Squad Room Facebook group on Facebook, of all places. And you can request application to the group because we're doing a lot, and I'm doing a lot more video content and interaction in that group than I used to. And I'm trying to engage with you more on a one-on-one basis there. Also, sign up for the mailing list so you're aware of new episodes. And there will be content delivered to your mailbox in relation to some of the episodes as well that comes to my mailing list. You can text The Squad Room, all one word, to 44222 to get signed up from your phone. Now, before we start the interview, I also want to thank a couple people that helped make this possible. This episode of The Squad Room is brought to you by Hardhead Veterans. When I finished the academy, I went to our equipment people for my uniforms and was handed an old riot helmet. And I mean old, like Vietnam era old. I have no idea what the ballistic properties are or what it had, and it was extremely uncomfortable, digging into my forehead and causing a splitting headache within minutes. That's why I was excited to find Hardhead Veterans and their modern and extremely economical ballistic helmets. Stay tuned because later in the show, I'm going to tell you more about this veteran-owned business and how you can get an even better deal on their top-of-the-line helmet. This episode of The Squad Room is also sponsored by Blue Line Flex. Blue Line Flex is a fitness apparel brand owned and operated by a veteran cop on the East Coast. Justin, the owner, started Blue Line Flex to create a high-quality apparel company that gives back to police charities. The Blue Line Flex t-shirts have an athletic shape and cut, and they're cut longer to allow for easier concealed carry. They also have a line of women's wear, including leggings and insulated protein shakers. You can check them out at BlueLineFlex.com or on Instagram at BlueLineFlex. Dan Jarvis of 220, welcome to the show, man. Nice to see you.
Hey, Garrett. Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. I want to give you a chance to talk about your background and what you're doing now, and I guess I'll bring it up later. But right before we hit record, I told you, you're running an organization now called 220.
Yes.
And I got to be in the room when that idea was first verbalized. And in the almost year since that's happened, I've watched you really bring this to fruition. And I'm excited to talk about what you are doing moving forward. But to talk about what you do moving forward, we need to understand, particularly with you,
okay,
where you came from. So tell us about yourself and your career.
Initially, right out of high school, I was 17 years old, and I decided that I was going to join the Army. Had to have parental permission. My father was career Navy, and he took it a lot better than I thought he would. I wanted to do the toughest thing I could, and that was in the infantry at the time. Joined the military, went through 2-year enlistment, did the Army College Fund. When I got out, went to school and was recalled during the first Gulf War. However short-lived that was, I never made it over there. 6 weeks later, I'm back home, back in school, and I decided to pursue a career in law enforcement. My undergraduate degree was criminology, so wanted to be a police officer. Worked for a local sheriff's office here in Central Florida. I did about 4 years and maybe 6 months. Started to get really burned out a little bit, and took a private sector job with a friend of mine that didn't really pan out too well. And I was going to go back into law enforcement, and then 9/11 happened. I had made a conscious decision to go back on active duty, re-enlisted in the Army, and found myself in Hawaii. I was there maybe, I want to say about 12 months before we deployed to Iraq. So we did it was initially a 12-month deployment, and it turned out to be a 15-month deployment. It was right during the surge when they were plussing up all the troops over there. We literally were, 4 weeks out from coming home, waiting to get the other unit to do the change out, and then notification came down we're being extended. So, which was hard because that was a very, very difficult deployment. We were in an area called Hawija. It was part of what they called the Sunni Triangle. And our battalion, we lost 17 Americans. So, I kind of would equate that to the size of the sheriff's office that I worked for. We had about 700 sworn deputies. So it'd be like losing 17 deputies in the course of a year. So that's kind of, how rough it was. We had a pretty kinetic fight, a lot of improvised explosive devices, a lot of sniper attacks, indirect fire. So, it was a different time. We were really taking it to the enemy. But at the same time, we were really taking some significant casualties. Right at the end of that deployment, we had one of our young men that got shot. He wasn't killed, but he was injured. And shortly after that, I was rendered unconscious when an indirect, it was like a 122 millimeter artillery round detonated, probably within about 10 to 15 feet of where I was standing. Fortunately, it was on the other side of a HESCO barrier, so the barrier absorbed the shrapnel. It was just the concussive force that kind of got me. So I had a little bit of a struggle. Shortly after that moment, we ended up back in Hawaii. But I kind of like adjusted. I got back to doing my job. Had to have surgery on my knee, and then got orders to become a drill sergeant. So the 2 years as a drill sergeant was nothing but a blur because we were working like literally 19-hour days. 6 days a week. I mean, it was pretty lengthy. And then right after leaving drill sergeant duty, going to a unit up in Alaska, and I think we were 6 weeks out of a deployment. So we went to Afghanistan with that unit. It was a Stryker brigade, and I was an infantry squad leader, so I was a staff sergeant. That deployment was very difficult because the rules of engagement has shifted so much. I mean, the first deployment was under President George W. Bush. Rules of engagement were significantly different. And then under President Barack Obama, we had a major shift on how we had to handle ourselves on the battlefield. I, on that deployment, lost half my men to combat casualties within the 6 months of fighting season. And one of my soldiers was killed. We lost Doug on a convoy when we were going off road, escorting the explosives guys to defuse an IED up on a hillside that one of the other platoons had encountered. My job was the lead truck commander for the Stryker units, and so I was the senior guy on the very front of the convoy. So that's kind of like the thermometer of the patrol. My job was to find anything, and if it was suspicious, we'd exploit it. EOD would come up and they'd take care of it. And that morning, it was August 19th, 2011. When I heard the explosion behind me, I looked back and I saw that it hit our fourth vehicle in the convoy, which was 3 vehicles behind mine. And I realized it was the MGS Stryker, which is the main gun system. Our Strykers were relatively secure. We had just fielded the double V-hull Strykers, where the blast pressure is distributed through the sides and the back of the Stryker when it hits it. Just an engineering marvel how they were able to do that. But Doug was driving the MGS, which had a flat bottom still. The problem with that is the pressure goes straight up into the hull of the vehicle. He got hit so hard when it launched him into the ceiling of the Stryker. You know how thick a Kevlar helmet is. His helmet was literally dented in.
Wow.
Yeah. So we lost him that morning, and man, I hated myself for that. I really, really did. It's one thing to take the life of the enemy. It's another thing to feel responsible for losing one of your own. So, and I was angry because as a leader, we don't ask for help when we know we're struggling. And that was at a point where I was really struggling because, only 3 weeks before that, I was leading a patrol across a river. We had 4 Americans and 4 Afghans and 1 interpreter. And I stepped on a pressure plate and detonated an IED that was literally about 5 feet away from where I was. So pretty significant blast injury. And from that moment forward, I had sleep disorder issues. I couldn't sleep at all. First 3 or 4 times I'd close my eyes to fall asleep, I'd hear the explosion. I thought we were actually under attack. I'd wake up and my heart's doing 130 beats a minute, and I'm up for the rest of the night at that point. So literally, it was like sleep was like an impossibility. And I kind of was angry at myself because had I taken a knee and stepped back, maybe let another leader take the front of the convoy, they might have caught it. So anyways, I dealt with that, and and then you think, we're getting ready to go home and things couldn't get any worse. And then I got the Red Cross notification that my mom had a massive heart attack. So now, I have to deal with that. I have to make a decision. Do I stay and finish the deployment with my men? Do I go home? Do I say goodbye to my mom? And, my first sergeant was like, I'm going to make the decision for you. You're going home. So the next morning I get on a convoy and I start that journey home. And it literally took me about 4 days to get back from my forward operating base to Tampa, Florida. And I didn't make it in time to say goodbye. She had already passed by that point. So did the family, the funeral, did all the stuff that you do when you bury your mom. It was difficult. I find myself back in Alaska, and I'm still having the issues with a sleep problem. So I think the first thing I did, I'm by myself. My unit's still in Afghanistan. They're prepping to come home. I went out and bought a case of beer and drank myself until I passed out. And then I realized, I can sleep. It's it's going to require me, consuming alcohol pretty much on a regular basis. And unfortunately, that's a very common problem amongst the military. Also, I'd imagine it's probably an issue with first responders because I knew a lot of officers who had serious drinking problems. When I got back and I received my men back, I knew there was going to be an adjustment period, and I figured, well, things will go back to normal. I'll eventually, pick back up and move on and move forward. 1 month turned into 2 months, turned into 4 months, and I'm like, yeah, it's like this ain't getting any better. It's like totally taking everything out of me emotionally. I became so angry, and I'd get depressed because things weren't getting better. And I know as a leader what post-traumatic stress is because we have to, look for it in our men. And many times when I would see that in my guys, I'd say, all right, let's go. And they're like, well, where are we going, Sergeant Jarvis? I'm like, we're going to go see the doc. You're going to go see a psychologist or talk with somebody. Well, I don't want to. I said, well, tough. I'm taking that responsibility away from you. Which I think most of them actually appreciated that because then they could say, oh, Sergeant Jarvis is just taking another one out. But it gave them an opportunity to talk to somebody. And after the fact, most of them appreciated that. But as a leader, if I were to say, hey, I need help, it's almost like it's the end of a career. You don't want to lose the respect of your command. You don't want to lose the respect of your men. Mm-hmm. So we, many leaders within the military are actually deciding to take their own lives versus deal with the embarrassment of saying, hey, I need help. Recently the United States Navy lost a 3-star admiral to suicide, right. And it's like, how do you ask for help at that level? You can't, and so I find myself getting more and more depressed. And, at the time I wasn't married. I had no children. I was 41, 42 years old. I mean, my last decade had been nothing but serving the country and deploying and, being a drill sergeant and leading soldiers. And I just got to the point where I'm like, you know what? It's been a good run. It's not that I was, scared or whatever. I just like, if this is the rest of my life, I don't want it. But the crazy thing is, and I've learned since then that if you don't take care of yourself, your body will keep score of the stress that it accumulates. And I got to that point where I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm checking out. I look at a rifle that I had in the corner of my room and I'm like, you know what? Just 1 second away. It's over. Don't have to worry about it. And then I heard the kids that were in the apartment above me running across the ceiling, and I realized, well, crap, I can't do that because it's a high-powered rifle, and I didn't want to hurt a kid. I then found myself, all right, I just passed out, and then I get a phone call the next morning, and it was Ryan. He was my driver from Afghanistan. He's like, hey, Sergeant Jarvis, did you hear about Corey? And I'm like, no, buddy, what's going on? He said, Corey shot and killed himself last night. And I just looked at that rifle I had in my room and I'm like, holy crap, what would that have done to the unit if 2 separate people on the same night had decided to end their lives? So that week we had to struggle through, preparations for the memorial service. They brought family in, and just seeing how the men handled it, I realized that was kind of a pivot point for me. It's like, well, I don't care how crappy life is. I'm not gonna be the one to give permission to one of my guys to take their own lives. So I just kind of fought through it, and after that I ended up having, a couple surgeries. I had one on my right shoulder and then I had one on my left shoulder. And, because of all the alcohol I'd been drinking, the Army says, oh, you're a type 2 diabetic. Thank you. We no longer need your service. And they processed a medical review board and made the determination, due to age and all that with the job that I had, it was time for me to move on. So, September 11th, 2014, ironically, was my last day on active duty. And I took off my uniform, and that was the one last thing that I had that identified me as a person. I was a soldier. I was a non-commissioned officer, and now I'm unemployed. So, got back to Florida. I literally drove from Fort Wainwright, Alaska through Canada to Florida. That took quite a while. It was quite a journey, actually. It's pretty cool. So I get home and I'm finding myself, I had owned a condominium. I had no bills. One of the things about deployments is you can really put a lot of money away. And But I had a retirement check and nothing to do. And then when you stop, and this is an issue that your listeners should really take heed with. When you get to that point in your career is over, you've retired, and there's nothing left, there's no other chapter, that's when a lot of the demons start coming back. So I struggled with the alcohol. But then I made a decision. I said, I'm not going to live the rest of my life this way. I was going to do something to kind of change my trajectory. So that's when, I said, all right, I'm stop. I'm not going to drink anymore. And that was a tough thing to do. Slowing down the alcohol. When I had been so dependent on it, because then I started losing, my sleep was getting worse. But at least I wasn't drinking, and I was going back to the gym, and I was like, man, I got to get my spiritual life back in order. So I was doing everything I could to try to fix things. And then I met somebody, which kind of changed everything. And my wife, Gwinnell, and I, we went out on our first date in January of 2015, and we were married April of 2016. And, I had in that time frame, I had actually gone back into law enforcement. I had to go back through the academy, go back and get my standards back. And I did that for about another 2 years, and I had a lot of back issues from all the torture that I put my body through as a soldier. I tried going up a mountain in Afghanistan at 40 years old with 100 pounds on your back. It's not fun, not fun at all. But so I left the sheriff's office, and then again, I had nothing to do, and that's when the dream started coming back. And my wife would literally kind of gently nudge me at night to try to wake me up. But I'd sweat so bad because I seriously was like I was doing cardio. So my wife, she asked, she was, hey, what did you do in the military? She didn't really know. I never really shared any stories with her, and I really didn't want to because there's nothing awesome about war. There's nothing beautiful about war. It's pretty ugly. Although you do make some really solid friendships with the men that you served with. So I started sharing stuff with her, and then she was like, oh my gosh, you have got to go talk to somebody. For me, what I was telling her, I thought was normal. Not everybody doesn't, experience this. So she encouraged, and I did. I went to the VA, which a lot of vets do. And that was, not a very pleasant experience. Probably their gold seal standard for treatment for post-traumatic stress. I was diagnosed post-traumatic stress and major depressive disorder. And the first thing they want to do is prescribe medications. And then they put you through this, there's a therapy called prolonged exposure. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Basically, it's a 14-week process where you sit there for an hour and a half and you just loop the same story over and over to the psychologist. And literally, they have to reopen all of those emotional wounds and talk about, the specific event of a specific day. And this is a 14-week process, and they give you homework and stuff, and just crazy things like, hey, sit in your office in your house and listen to taps for an hour every day. That's an emotional event for a lot of guys who have lost a lot of friends.
Absolutely.
You hear that, and it's just like it just hits you, it gut punches you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the VA canceled an appointment, and I was like, well, crap, this is supposed to be every week, and I rescheduled and couldn't get me in for 4 more weeks. I'm like, great. And then I went to another appointment, and then they canceled another appointment. I couldn't get in for 8 more weeks, and I'm like, I'm done. So I stopped going to the VA. I'm like, screw this. And later found out that specific therapy that the VA does, they have an 80% dropout rate for veterans. Like, seriously, and the veterans that commit suicide under the VA health system is typically during that type of treatment. You kind of look at it, it's like if you have a tourniquet on an arterial wound and you pull the tourniquet off, the blood's going to go everywhere. It's the same thing with that type of therapy. It's basically you're taking the tourniquet off the emotion, and the emotion just goes everywhere. So it's very difficult. And then my wife, she works for the sheriff's office as well, but she's a senior level administrator. And she brings leadership trainers into the agency for sergeants and above. And she brought a gentleman to do training. His name is Scott Mann. We both know Scott. Matter of fact, that's how we met.
Yep.
Scott's a retired Army Green Beret lieutenant colonel. And he invited me. We went out to dinner and we talked a little bit. And, he was an officer. I was a non-commissioned officer. So, we're doing the proverbial butt sniffing. It's like, it'd be like a deputy with a sheriff, whatever. So he invited me to attend his Spartans Rising event. And that's where you and I met. And that was only April of last year. And met Doc Diego Hernandez, who's a clinical psychologist, and I'm asking him, I said, Doc, what the heck is post-traumatic stress and why can't we fix it? He explained it to me in terms that, that I really understood it. And for your audience, all post-traumatic stress is we experience a trauma, an emotional trauma, and if we don't process the trauma, and it'll stay in our short-term memory. So with that being stuck in the short term, it's constantly available for recall. So if you have a nightmare, that's because you have the memory fresh for you. If you have a flashback, it's because it's in your short-term memory still. If you have a thought process that just kind of comes in, it's because it's always there, and we don't process it to the long term. And I didn't realize this, but when we sleep at night and get rest, we have what we call is the REM sleep cycle. And that's when the brain actually processes the data from the day's events in the last couple of days and moves the memory and files it away to the long-term storage. And then it doesn't become an issue. 80% of those who experience trauma will process memories just fine. They'll go back to sleep. But my thing was sleep deprivation and self-medication. So I never got to the point where I could process the memories and put the memories where they belong. So I told Doc, I said, I gotta come in. I gotta try some of this therapy that he's talking about. And what he focuses on is the accelerated resolution therapy. And that's basically based on eye movements. Similar, it was developed after the EMDR process. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yep. Yeah, we've had Doc on the show even.
Okay, perfect. Well, so I go to a session with Doc. What he did is he connected me with an organization that actually would pay for therapy for post 9/11 veterans, because I wasn't working at the time, and started seeing Doc. And literally within the first session, I was like, man, this is pretty cool. I go home and I'm talking to my wife and I'm telling her about it. And she's like, whoa, stop. I'm like, what? She's like, who are you and where is my husband? I was like, well, I was excited again. I was like, I now know how I can fix this.
Right.
Because we look at post-traumatic stress like it's an illness and it can be managed long-term. And the fact is that couldn't be farther from the truth. Post-traumatic stress is an injury to the brain where our brain doesn't actually process the way it's supposed to. So, and then also, I met with Tom Padilla. He was also in that Spartans Rising event.
Yeah.
He is connected with another organization that does a similar memory reconsolidation to the ART, but it's called the Reconsolidation Traumatic Memories Protocol. So I do a video and I put it out on my social media. I was like, you know what? Power of vulnerability. You got to throw it out there. Scott kind of has taught me to tell the story in terms where I can, really connect with people. So I tell my story to a camera as I'm holding it in my hand, which is really weird to do. And then I put it out on Facebook, and the thing got circulated like 9,000 times. And then I started having people call me, message me, reach out to me. And I was surprised. I couldn't believe it that I actually had a deputy from a county over from where I live now who saw the video. And I'm like, how did you find this? And she goes, well, a friend of mine from Tennessee saw the video and sent it to me. So I'm like, that's just crazy to me. So my wife and I realized that, we could really make an impact in this space. I'm not doing anything. So, I finally figured out what I want to be when I grew up. And unfortunately, it took me 48 years to get there, So we started the 22-0. The number 22 is significant for those of us in the military and veteran space, is the number of veteran suicides per day. The VA has come in and kind of revised that number a little bit. I think they said, well, it's not 22, it's 20.2. No, it's not much better. So splitting hairs on that.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things that I've learned when I went out with Tom Padilla to Albuquerque to see how the RTM protocol works. And I get out there and Tom has done like unbelievable stuff with Dr. Burke and the Research and Recognition Project. He literally self-funded the first training in the United States. Now, I think between the ART and the RTM, they've got a pretty good lock on fixing post-traumatic stress. So I told the chief trainer for Research and Recognition, his name's Alan Canerva. He's a Canadian. He was a pilot in the Canadian military. He's the one that leads the instruction for it. And I'm like, I want to go through this protocol. I want to try it. So and the thing is, the protocol is not therapy, which I think is pretty cool because most of us guys, we kind of get this John Wayne mindset. We don't want talk therapy. It's considered a neurological intervention. He's had a lot of recent developments with that RTM. He's now been accepted. They're researching it through the Walter Reed Hospital. They're doing an 18-month study. The VA is now doing a study. And that's huge because, once they recognize it, then it'll become more mainstream. So I asked him, I said, I want to go through this. And he puts me up on the stand. One of the last traumas that I was dealing with was the death of my mom, not being there for her. She had a lot of health issues and, me deploying. And I saw her once a year, maybe twice a year if I was lucky. So for the last 8 years of her life, I've pretty much, not been present. And, that's, anybody can relate to that. Even you as a police officer or deputy sheriff,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You got to take care of yourself and your family. But, the stress that we put on the family for the jobs that we do, I felt a lot of guilt that, maybe I played part of her, downfall with her health, the stress and whatnot.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I tell Alan, I said, I want to do this. So he's like, you want to do it today? I said, yeah. He said, how about in 10 minutes? I'm like, sure. He goes, you want to do it in front of the class? I'm like, yeah, no big deal. So it's a class full of skeptical mental health counselors who haven't really fully bought in yet. And I go through this protocol with him, and it's different than the ART. It's a little bit different. Basically, what they do is they kind of get you into the thought of the memory, and then once you have a reaction to it, where they see that it's something's bothering you, or you might blood pressure might be going up, you might be breathing, they'll pull you out of it, what they call a break state. And at the break state, they run the protocol. You go through the protocol, and it's got to do with disassociating the memory. They'll bookend the memory, the beginning and end, and they'll run a script between the two. So literally, the counselor is doing nothing but coaching you through this process. You're actually having to do the work. Mm-hmm. And then there's a point where you got to drain the color out of it. So it's like an old black and white movie. And that is difficult. That takes a little bit of work. And then you get to the point where you then put yourself up in a movie projector room in the theater, and you're watching yourself in the theater watch the movie. Mm. So you're not watching the movie. So you're totally disassociated from the event. And then they have you go back into it, and then they have you run it in reverse. And then you're like, that was weird, because when I did it, I felt this little tingle in the base of my neck. And then I'm like, oh, that's pretty wild. And they'll have you rate the stress level that you're at, 0 to 10, 0 being no negative emotions, 10 being negative. And that specific memory, I was pretty high. I was probably about an 8. And then I'm finding myself thinking about it, I'm at like a 2. And I'm like, this is just weird. So I do the visualization for a different outcome. And they'll tell you, think about a better outcome of the event. And literally all you're doing is you're projecting a different emotion, and then the emotion imprints over the old emotion. Mm-hmm. So it's like a new emotional state is attached to the memory, and then all of a sudden it clears the entire memory up, and you're like, you're at a 0. You're able to tell the whole story in vivid detail, and you're like, that's pretty cool. Look at Alan. I'm like, what is this, some kind of Jedi mind trick? Is this like hypnosis? What? He goes, no, it's not. It's just a process that, the vulnerability of the memory can be, overwritten by a new emotional state. So that happens. So I've been helping Tom Padilla with his stuff, and with the 22-0, we basically created a website, and now we're connecting veterans and first responders with counselors. We're helping them, conduct some fundraising for trainers. And that Albuquerque one, we flew 3 counselors out. And 2 of those counselors are very active in what they do. And since October 1st have cleared, between the 2 of them, about 28 cases of post-traumatic stress.
Wow.
And I mean, that's significant. That's just 2 counselors in a very short amount of time. So, I'm finding myself in this space, learning everything I can about the brain. It kind of scares me. Having a conversation with Doc Diego and actually be able to understand what he's talking about, it's like, that's pretty wild. So get into what we're doing now. I mean, yesterday I was down in Parkland, Florida, where they had the shooting last Valentine's Day.
Yeah, the school shooting.
Yeah, at the school. So some of the counselors down there have been reaching out.
Hi, my name is Kit Dump, and I am the Sales and Marketing Director for Hardhead Veterans. Hardhead Veterans believes that police should have the best equipment available to them. That's why Hardhead Veterans exists. I come from a military family. As far as I can think back, that was what was going to happen. When I first got into the military, when I first checked into my first team, we were issued what was called the Mitch helmet, a mid-ear type cut helmet. We wore those things for every operation, every mission. Helmets at that time were around $1,500 for a decent quality, high-cut ballistic helmet that worked well with everything you'd want it to do. With helmets, a lot of people see the resistance to penetration test as the end-all be-all, and our helmets certainly pass that test for level 3A, but there's a whole nother level of tests. Publish that data directly on our website, and you can actually compare apples to apples there and see what helmets are performing at and the actual lab data there. There are quite a few companies now that have come out and are selling very similar helmets that do not meet the full battery of tests. Departments would love to outfit all their guys with helmets. That's really out of the question for most departments. The reaction has been amazing. Go look at our reviews on Facebook or Google. I'm Kit Dump, and our mission is to help you guys stay safe.
These kids are still stuck, and there's issues with first responders, and of course now I think it's kind of mind-boggling in the state of Florida. They just recognize post-traumatic stress as a reason to put somebody on workers' comp. Before it used to be you had to have an injury, and the injury had to result in post-traumatic stress, which is ridiculous. But the cool thing is we're now organizing a training down in Parkland. At the end of this month, we're going to be down there. We're probably going to get about 20 to 30 counselors trained, and we're doing the fundraising and helping, supplement the counselors. Mental health counselors, they make about as much money as police officers. So trying to ask one of them to pay $2,500 is it's quite a big task. So we're doing fundraising to try to mitigate that cost for them. And I think once they go down there and they start having successes in treating the children and the first responders down there, I think Frank Burke and his organization is just going to take off, and they're probably going to have more training sites set up than they're going to know what to do with. Another project we're going to do is go out to Vegas with the Vegas shooting, the Harvest Festival. So the cool thing is, and I hope your listeners understand that the protocol is actually, you could do it within an immediate time frame after a traumatic event. And so, like, if you're a police officer and you're forced to shoot or kill an emotionally disturbed person, or have to work a homicide investigation where you have 3 or 4 family members dead, or a traffic homicide police officer who's got to investigate a traffic fatality with like an entire family in there, you can literally have the protocol done and resolve the traumatic emotions almost immediately. So, you'll never develop the post-traumatic stress. So, in a perfect world, you would have an event occur and have the resources available for you to actually, hey, let's just go take care of it, clear your junk out, and go back to work. The stress that we accumulate. I have a friend of mine he was a Delta operator for special forces. He had a 5-man Delta team that so far 3 of them have left service and killed themselves. He attempted to take his own life. We got him through the RTM protocol. From the very first session, he started sleeping again, and we're talking, he's been out of the military. He was first Gulf War. He's been out of the military and been struggling to get back to a normal. Drinks every night, has alcohol dependency issues. It's the same things that I did, but I didn't have to go 20 years, with that kind of an issue. There are comorbidities that come with stress, with post-traumatic stress. He developed kidney cancer, health-wise, in law enforcement, we've had officers just stroke out and drop dead, heart attacks, drop dead. Pinellas County Sheriff's Office has had 2 suicides since November of 2017, one as recent as a month ago. Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office has had a deputy murder 3 members of his family and then kill himself, and then they had another deputy who murdered somebody and killed themselves. And it's just crazy. We're losing more police officers and firefighters, paramedics to our own hand than we are to line of duty deaths.
Yep. Yeah.
But the crazy thing is we're at a point now where there's solutions out there. Your audience should be aware that this, between the reconsolidation traumatic memories protocol and accelerated resolution therapy, if you're struggling, you seriously need to reach out to somebody. There is no reason to suffer. And all it is, it's not the visual of the stuff that we see that's the problem. It's the emotion that we attach to the visual. And unfortunately, a lot of that comes from our own baggage that we've had since before we worked law enforcement. And the protocol for the RTM, the youngest it's been successfully utilized on is a child 7 years of age. So imagine what that's going to look like if you could take a victim of a rape or whatever and literally clear out the trauma and put a 9-year-old on a witness stand and say, that guy did this to me, blah, 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 blah. You're probably going to have a lot more people out there pleading guilty to, before even going to a witness stand.
Yeah. So I want to go back to a couple things you touched on because there's just some interesting points. One is you're talking about as a leader, it's hard to ask for help. And I find that's absolutely accurate as you go in law enforcement. I'm sure it's the same in the military, but in law enforcement, as you go up the chain, there are fewer and fewer people, right? It's like a pyramid. There are fewer people at your level who you can converse with, who you can confide in, who are sharing that same experience that you are, right? And that I have found at times, one of the things I was surprised most about when I became a sergeant was how lonely that position can be sometimes, in the sense that, the guys are the guys. They're off there doing their thing and they're doing the work. You're not in that mode anymore. You're also now the supervisor. So there's sometimes a natural reluctance to include you, just because you're the supervisor, not because of a personality issue. And that we then slowly begin to silo ourselves off, and then you turn around and all of a sudden nobody's left. And I thought that was an interesting point you made, and that you felt the same way. And then this idea of giving permission to your guys. I want to touch on that and explain that a little bit more for me. I mean, you were as close as you could be to pulling that trigger without doing it, right?
Yes.
And you got to think that for some reason those footsteps occurred above your bed or above your apartment at that moment for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. Or you're just you lucked out that you had a moment something kind of snapped you out of it and provoked you to at least extend or wait, right? And in that time frame, then you learned about the death of someone that you were close with. Explain that idea, though, of giving permission to your guys, because I think that can extend to almost anything a leader does. We give them permission by the way we act. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, the giving permission to my guys, for me, we lose quite a bit of people active duty to suicides. We're probably comparable to the first responder community. More veterans are committing suicide, but they are still losing a lot of active duty guys. So when I was a drill sergeant at Fort Knox, we had a drill sergeant who took a shotgun and went out to one of the ranges on base and killed himself. And then you just realize, man, that is just why. At that moment, I didn't understand. I mean, I was part of the problem, and being the alpha male and, suck it up, do what you got to do. But when I deployed and went to Afghanistan and came back, I had a really good friend of mine he was a staff sergeant, and I kept trying to tell him, hey, look, man, you need to go talk to somebody. But he was like me. I was a staff sergeant as well. And I knew this young man as a baby soldier when he was just a private in my unit in Iraq. He was one of my men, and I knew how he was and I knew his caliber. But when he came home from Afghanistan, he had a couple blast injuries, as I did, and he was spiraling out of control. And I'm trying to help him out. And something happens with him, he ends up in trouble, and he gets field graded, and then goes before the battalion commander. He asked me if I'd speak on his behalf, and I did that. I went to speak with his commander, who was totally different than mine. The Army made me a drill sergeant, so I really didn't have a really good filter. I asked for him for permission to speak freely. He said, sure, go ahead. I said, I know you were not, Sergeant Morton's commander, but his previous command failed him miserably. And the sergeant major that was there was looking at me like he wanted to pull my throat out. You don't talk to a colonel that way, because what do you mean? I said, he was in a blast injury twice back to back within a week. I said, you have to be aware of the cognitive effects that has on a person. He said, I am. And why did the command fail him? I said, well, because he came home from deployment early and never processed through the process that they do for the medical. Long story short on him, it ended up buying him some time with the military. They didn't kick him out. They were going to kick him out with a dishonorable. So they got him to get help. And that from that point forward, I realized, it was my responsibility, not only for people that I know, but for the men that work for me, that I need to be able to tell them that it's okay to ask for help. And that's what I would do. I would literally say, all right, let's go. And the cool thing is I would even have men call me after I retired from the military, and have to walk them back off the ledge a little bit. But this is before I knew anything about the successful treatments out there. But as a leader, you've got to have enough compassion for your men. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some pretty horrific events over the course of your 14-year career. You guys have had active shooters in Southern California. I mean, look at the fires out there. How do you think your men are affected knowing that, wow, this family just lost everything? That's trauma in itself, but we like to think that we're tough guys. And we can handle it and we can move past it, but, we do stupid things. We go out with our buddies and we drink, we do all of this stuff, and that's how we kind of handle it. But that has a negative effect on the health of the officer as well. Long term, short term, it feels great, but long term, it's not so good. Mm-hmm. And then you get the officer out there who's working as many extra details as he possibly can, because cops don't make a lot of money, and they're trying to make a little bit of extra cash, and they really don't get any downtime. And then you start seeing families being affected by the absence of the husband or the absence of the father, the disengagement. We tend to distance ourselves. I really wish that, law enforcement wasn't as let's just say cops are requested and required to do more than probably any other profession out there. And they keep putting more and more onto police officers. It's like, people don't understand the amount of training it takes to be a cop, and then, having to go out there and make a split-second decision, and then everybody else has all the time in the world to second guess what you did, and not even thinking about what's the emotional state of the officer, it's not a normal act to kill somebody. It's not. And, it happens. And that's part of the job. I have a couple friends here at the sheriff's office where I worked with that were forced to kill individuals. And, that's just not normal. We do what we do and we handle it. We may joke about it because that's the way we handle the stress. But there will be a day of reckoning when those emotional thoughts are going to come back. So you got to take care of yourself. You have to have some kind of fitness plan. You have to have some kind of let's eat healthy plan. What is it? 5 years after retirement that a lot of police officers die. Yeah. That's like you give your entire life to a profession and a career, and our health gets affected by it. So now,
yeah, I want to touch on the. I want to talk about the alcohol because that's a big one for a lot of people, and it's, it serves. To some people, it serves a lot of purposes or several purposes. But how did you quit, or did you just cut back? And what was that process like? What did you do? I know you said you just decided, but there must have been something else than to just in one snap second decide you weren't going to do it.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an overnight thing. I did cut back considerably, and I just kind of slowly came off of it. But when I got involved with my wife, I had something else to occupy my time, and we didn't drink a lot together because we were having too much fun. We didn't need it, which helped because over time, they say it takes 45 days for the brain to hardwire a new habit. So eventually I got to the point where, I don't need it anymore. My new normal did not require me to have the alcohol. And I don't think I've had anything to drink probably in the last 8 months. So, which is good,
Of course.
I just haven't felt the need for it. I wouldn't mind a glass of wine every once in a while, but, it came down to most of the alcohol that I would consume would be to numb something, let me sleep. Let me, I really don't want to think about all these things that are coming back up. Yeah. Social interaction. It's easier to interact socially sometimes. And that's the thing with alcohol is it's socially acceptable, especially in your first responder professions. I mean, all my family have been military. All the males in our family have been just about every branch of military covered, and all of them have been first responders. So, with the exception of my mom's side, but my dad's side of the family. So, drinking has always been a huge part of even our social family structure. But that's why. It's, I would suggest it too. I think Doc Diego helped me understand as we age, our testosterone levels will drop off, and alcohol drops testosterone. Well, I don't think any guy wants that to happen. So that was like, man, I better stop drinking so much. My wife's not going to like that.
Yeah. So 22-0.
Yes.
That's now your organization. There's a lot. There is a attention given, I think to the veteran suicides, and it's obviously an important issue. And, but what was it about your experience that provoked you to jump in with your organization? Meaning, there are organizations out there that are trying to bring attention to this in one way or another. But to me, it strikes me that, you struggled first time out of the military because you were lacking the purpose and sense of ownership over that job that you had in the military. You got it again when you went back into the military, but then again left the military and lost it. But then you had that again when you went to the sheriff's office again. So having your mission, this seems like it's your personal mission, and that is driving you. Is that fair?
Actually, the cool thing about that is, that's absolutely fair. When Alan and I were talking out in Albuquerque and we said our goodbyes, he looks at me and goes, "It's nice to have a mission, isn't it?" And you've got to have a mission. You've got to have a purpose, no matter what it is. And, When you retire from law enforcement, you know what? All that is one chapter of your life. It's time to start a new one. Write a book, do whatever. Do a TED talk, whatever it is, you can work towards something. But yeah, the veteran suicide, the 22 a day, is problematic. But, like I said, back to the first responders as well, they don't even track suicides of people who were first responders that leave that profession like they do the military. I don't even think that they want to study that number as well. They should. That'd be probably a good PhD for somebody to work on. But the thing with the military is, and I tell people this, there's a lot of senior level law enforcement that don't think that law enforcement can suffer the same post-traumatic stress that the military guys because of what we see in war. But that's just not true. The post-traumatic stress comes from getting stuck in the fight or flight. And that's the reality of it. You get up to the level of fight or flight where we then, basically react at the lowest instinctive level, and then we get stuck there. And then your body's spitting cortisol constantly to your brain, which is your stress hormone. And, you either fight, freeze, or you flee. That's the process. So, but when we come home, that 20% of us that don't get out of that fight or flight, that's when we have the post-traumatic stress. Now, let's go look at law enforcement. You guys are fight or flight 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no off button for y'all. When we go to work, we work a 12-hour shift. We go home, we go to bed, we wake up, we do it all over again. This happens for an entire career, sometimes 25, 30 years for people. Think about the health implications that has for law enforcement officers. And that's why you're seeing heart disease. That's why you're seeing strokes. That's why you're seeing, depression and post-traumatic stress and all the other stuff, because police officers never get a chance to come down from the fight or flight. That's problematic. So the cool thing with the RTM, and as it becomes more mainstream and readily available, you literally can what it does is it shuts off the fight or flight response. So you can literally come out of fight or flight, and then get back into that, as Scott calls, rest and digest, because you got to be able to process and rest, and, your body's got to have recovery time, has to, don't work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So for your young viewers out there who want to make a lot of money on Signal 15s, or as we called it, or special details, it's not worth it. Yeah. Not at all.
All right, Dan, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about your mission and how to help, or how to get help and learn more about RTM from you?
We have a website called www.220zero.org. We have a 220 Facebook page. They can reach out to us. And what we do is we try to find the counselor closest to them, and it may not be RTM, it could be ART. We're not specific to any one. I think the RTM is profound, and I think a lot of people will find some good use out of it, but accelerated resolution therapy is just as good. But what we do is we try to find the resources. Your combat vets that are post 9/11 that don't want to ask for help through their agencies, they can contact the Camaraderie Foundation, or they can contact us, and we'll put them in touch, and they'll pay for off-site therapy that never gets reported back to their agencies, and nothing gets reported back to the VA as well. So.
And how about socials? Are you on Facebook or Instagram with 220?
I'm on Facebook at 220. Instagram, we just started one, but I haven't even got my head around Facebook yet. Like I said, I'm 48. I'm not a millennial. I'm not a brilliant genius like some of these young kids are.
Yeah,
but I'm working on it. So
you'll get there. Dan, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. What a great conversation. Really some valuable lessons about, just because you're a leader doesn't mean that your armor is impenetrable from this, and that as a leader we give our permission to our people by the way we act and the way we present, and that there's no shame or fear or embarrassment in resolving what is a neurological issue. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your service. I love what you're doing with 220, and luckily I get to connect up with you later this year, and maybe we'll do a part 2 from there.
Amen. Let's do it, brother.
All right.
Take care. Stay safe, Garrett.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Squad Room. If you like what you heard, if you got something out of this episode with Dan, please share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Grab their phone out of their hand, hit share, grab your phone and hit share. Send it to somebody, email, text, whatever you got to do. But some of this information is important. RTM or ART or EDMR or just talking to somebody could save a life. It really could. All right, to get more information on Dan, go to 220.org. And to get more information in the show notes, you can go to thesquadroom.net, and you'll find this episode right up there. And you'll get show notes, links, all that sort of stuff as well. And like I said, join our Facebook group, join the mailing list. You can text The Squadroom, all one word, to 44222 to get signed up from your phone. And I especially want to thank Hardhead Veterans for their support of the show. You can get $20 off of your own ballistic helmet by using the code SQUADROOM on their website at hardheadveterans.com. Until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.